The interesting thing is, I know everyone comes up to you and asks you questions all the time about all different things. Do you think that the draft is going to come up in the room tonight? And what do you think the one question everyone's going to ask you? You know, I know there's some Bills fans, some Giants fans there. What's the one draft question to you, Maggie?
Well, it's funny. I actually ran into someone who I went to high school with today already at a restaurant this morning, and they were like, what's up with the S2 test? I was like, wow, that's kind of in the weeds. But that's what everyone's talking about right now when it comes to CJ Stroud. It's like that game against Georgia Perloff just didn't exist. You know, this all-time great performance in the college football playoff, the semifinal, takes on Georgia. Sure, it was a losing effort. 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was excellent that night. And it's like that game tape all of a sudden just burned up because 2 things are really working against CJ Stroud right now. Number one, the fact that he went to Ohio State as a quarterback, which helps you at every other position on the football field. But at quarterback, not as much of a lineage, although we'll see what Justin Fields turns out to be because there's a lot of time here for Fields. And this S2 test, this processing test, not an intelligence test, not the Wonderlic test, nothing like that, but how you process information, the reports are that he scored pretty low. And that was the first question I got asked when I ran into an old high school friend today.
Well, I would only disagree with this. Not all the tape looks good for CJ Stroud. I don't think you could pick up one game. You can't take the best game, you can't take the worst game of anybody. There's a lot of average tape on CJ Stroud in an offense where you have no room to be average at all because everyone kills it. And there are a couple things. Also, Stroud, couple big moments didn't show up. I'm thinking of Michigan. And he has really bad numbers under pressure. I'm not sure you've seen this. PFF says he's 97th out of 140 in D1 under pressure. So I think the thinking on Ohio State quarterbacks is it's such an easy offense, but when it breaks down, what can CJ Stroud do? Now, before the Georgia game, it wasn't much. So I don't think it's just because he went to Ohio State. I think it's because the nature of Ohio State, and then you see the way he performed, not just in that Georgia game, but in all the games. He wasn't really, when things break down, I'm going to save the day kind of guy.
I know the funny thing about that, though, Perloff, is when we compare him to the other quarterbacks who are around him in the draft, like, okay, he didn't have great tape against Michigan. You know, Will Levis didn't have good tape against Vandy. I mean, Will Levis did have some really good tape, especially in 2021 when he was running a more pro-style offense 2 years ago. But like Anthony Richardson doesn't. There are throws that Anthony Richardson had in games that he had that was like, this doesn't, what am I watching here? And so if you're going to say, well, CJ Stroud had a bad game against Michigan, at least Michigan was a Final Four team. I mean, Michigan was an incredible defense. And I think if you do the apples to apples there, you'd have to say CJ Stroud played not only against Michigan defenders who are really good, Georgia defenders who are really good, and look at the tape there, he rose to the occasion.
Well, the problem is, though, it's the offense. I think it's really, at the end of the day, it's the offense. Ohio State, I know there's a lot of spread offenses, but people say everything's done for you by the coaches pre-snap. And then you're only reading parts of the field. It's not what NFL quarterbacks do. But I think you have a good point, though. Levis certainly flawed. Will Levis out of Kentucky flawed. Anthony Richardson certainly flawed out of Florida. Is it possible this quarterback class is just not that great? I don't even know. I'm starting to think, Maggie, we've been back and forth all spring, that maybe they all start to fall. Bryce Young goes number 1, and then maybe, Will Levis is now the favorite to go number 2 overall. But it feels like with Levis, if he doesn't go 2 to Houston or 4 to Indianapolis or some trade, he could fall to 20. Anthony Richardson could fall to 20. CJ Stroud could fall to the Raiders at 7 or even lower. Where do you stand on the chance that we're not going to see something close to the 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's funny. The idea that Levis now is now minus money, so odds-on favorite to go number 2 overall, as you just mentioned. I think the big question is that the Texans who are actually making that pick, or did somehow a market suddenly materialize for the number 2 overall pick? Because that market has not been there, right? The market for number 1 was huge. We saw the Chicago Bears, they cashed in. They got the first-round pick next year. They got DJ Moore. This was really smart for Chicago in trading down with Carolina. But that number 2 pick has just been barren. And everyone thought that the Indianapolis Colts were going to be the one to trade up. Peter King, in his Football Morning in America column today, doubled down, said they are not trading up. So where's all this Will Levis love coming from? Is it actually the Texans who are actually going to make that pick? Or is it another team that suddenly fell in love with Will Levis and has to do everything they can to go get him?
How about, okay, I know the Peter King reported the Colts aren't going to trade up, but I think there's a possibility, and I like this is how you think. I know that the Texans floated out, we might like Will Levis at number 2 to sort of stoke the market for him. And I would think for Indianapolis, here's the thing. Can Houston and Indianapolis trade quarterbacks? Because say Indianapolis comes up to 2 for Will Levis and he's great, then Houston is going to be the one that traded a quarterback within their division. That's too dangerous. I mean, is there any chance there's an outside team that likes Will Levis? I heard a long breakdown of how Will Levis is this year's Josh Allen from, I think it was Dan Orlovsky, that he is basically had bad talent around him, bad coaching his final season at Kentucky, and is really a much better player than that. So, I don't know. I do understand that odds. I still think Houston gets stuck there and goes defense, but I'm starting to think now I'm reordering my quarterbacks. I think I'm going to go. I wouldn't be shocked if it went Young, Levis, and then I'd also wouldn't be surprised if Richardson rose above Stroud, believe it or not. I think Richardson's another one. He could go 5 or he could go 20.
This draft is becoming a referendum on a couple things. And I don't know if it's fair to put this all in this draft class with these quarterbacks, but number 1 is size. You mentioned Bryce Young, minus 2,000 right now to go to the Carolina Panthers. He's going number 1, but never had someone this short, never had someone this slight go be a first-round draft pick, and we'll see how that happens. So size is on the table this draft cycle. Also, this processing, whatever this means, processing, this S2 test, this is on the table right now, too, because if CJ Stroud becomes the next, Trevor Lawrence, then that whole S2 test is going to look like it doesn't mean anything, and whoever he falls to is going to end up looking awesome. Ohio State quarterbacks, again, there's always a referendum there. And then tools. Tools is a referendum for these quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. When the tape isn't great, when the tape's not consistent, when they don't have, beautiful things to show you, can they still be drafted and be drafted really high? Like Josh Allen, I mean, let's not forget, he is a bit of an outlier. There were a lot of people who were down on Josh Allen because his accuracy was awful, and no one thought you could fix that on the pro level. He sort of was the poster child for tools, just having a lot of tools, and we'll see if Richardson and Levis kind of push that forward or if they become sort of the cautionary tales. Hey, you got to take someone who's more of a finished product.
Yeah, I agree with most everything that you just said, especially the Josh Allen. The S2, I think, was a big factor last year in the quarterback falls. I think the S2's become public this year, but teams have been using it the last few years, and they seem to buy into some aspect of it. Now, think about Josh Allen, and let's talk about Jordan Love at Utah State. I heard an interesting stat the other day. There's never been, and see if you can, off the top of your head, refute this. There's never been a big conference quarterback who had terrible college stats who's made it in the NFL. That's a generality, but there have been guys at lower schools who obviously have not played with a lot of talent who have been really good. Josh Allen, I think Jordan Love is about to be really good. I think the NFL thought Trey Lance would be that guy. So generally, if you're at a Big Ten school, if you're in an SEC school and you're not good in college, doesn't history say you're not going to be good in the pros? There's just lots and lots of evidence, which makes me wonder why this year are Will Levis and Anthony Richardson being pushed up when usually the NFL does not ignore college tape as much as they seem to be doing right now.
Yeah, that's what I said. I think tools, like that's the projection, right? It's, they weren't that great in the SEC, but we can turn them into something. I mean, listen, again, Will Levis sat behind Sean Clifford at Penn State. Nobody thinks that Clifford is going to be a great pro. He might, but he's not even getting drafted by most mock drafts. Like by most accounts, he's not even getting drafted. And this was the guy who sat behind him, who couldn't beat him out for the job, who could be going top 5.
Well, they had Levis. Levis was always designed to be a running quarterback at Penn State. I don't think they ever envisioned him taking over that job. And by the way, Clifford beat out a lot of guys, so it's not just Levis. I mean, that's a complicated story. I don't think that's a fair critique of Will Levis. But who cares? Will Levis had terrible stats last year.
I know we're talking about the top of the draft here, though.
Yeah,
We're talking about the top. We're not talking about, is a guy going to be a third rounder, you know?
Well, Richardson couldn't beat out Emory Jones. I mean, listen, you could go, Joe Burrow couldn't beat out Dwayne Haskins, and Joe Burrow is arguably one of the great college quarterbacks of all time. I don't know if you could always judge by that.
At least Haskins was a first-round pick.
Yeah. No, I mean, but you could go down the list, all these guys, a lot of guys. Aaron Rodgers couldn't even, went to JUCO. So anyway, and Jalen Hurts obviously got benched halfway through the title game for Tua Tagovailoa. Yeah, I agree with you. You could pick apart all these guys. I think if it wasn't so much demand, Maggie, I think it would go 1, Bryce Young, and then 22 would be the next quarterback. But it's just teams desperately need those cheap quarterbacks on a 5-year deal. Although, you know what I would do, Maggie, right? I'd wait till next year. And I know that never works, ever. It never works in the NFL. But I'm going, as a Sixers fan, full process. Why not?